Hey everyone, welcome back to Mimi Horror Stories. Tonight, we're bringing you another episode of spine-tingling horror tales set against the calming sound of rain to help you relax and drift off to sleep. So, get comfortable, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. It was the Great Depression, and the trains became a lifeline for many desperate souls seeking work, food, or a mere semblance of hope. I was one of those hobos, riding the rails in search of a better tomorrow. But what I found was far more sinister. Kingsbury Run was a notorious spot, a grimy, industrial stretch in Cleveland where the tracks converged. It was a haven for the down and out, a place where you could blend into the shadows and disappear. But it was also the hunting ground for a monster. I first heard the rumors from other hobos. They spoke in hushed tones about a killer who preyed on men like us, dismembering his victims and leaving their bodies scattered like gruesome jigsaw pieces. They called him the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. I dismissed the stories as fear-mongering until the night I encountered him. It was a cold, moonless night when I arrived at Kingsbury Run. The air was thick with the stench of industry and decay. I found a spot near an old, rusted railcar to hunker down for the night. As I settled in, I heard a noise, a soft, almost rhythmic chopping sound. My curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to investigate. What I saw chilled me to the bone. There, in the dim light of a flickering lantern, a figure was hunched over something on the ground. The unmistakable scent of blood filled the air. I watched in horror as the figure methodically hacked at a lifeless body, dismembering it with a terrifying precision. My stomach churned, and I fought the urge to retch. I must have made a sound, for the figure suddenly stopped and looked up. Our eyes met, and I saw nothing but cold, calculating madness in his gaze. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near another group of hobos who had made a fire for warmth. I told them what I had seen, my voice trembling. Their faces reflected my fear, and we all knew we had to get out of Kingsbury Run. The next morning, we boarded the first train out, leaving behind the grim specter of the Mad Butcher. Dozen men remain nameless, their lives reduced to grisly headlines and cold case files. The memory of that night still haunts me, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. Even now, whenever I hear the distant wail of a train whistle, I think of Kingsbury Run and the monster who prowled its shadows. The Great Depression took many things from us: our jobs, our homes, our dignity. But for some, it also took their lives, stolen by a madman who remains a ghost in the annals of history. It was a sweltering day in the summer of 2004 when the news broke. A college student had been found murdered near the abandoned train tracks in New York City. I remember it vividly because it shook our community to its core. She was a bright and talented student, full of life and promise. We often saw her jogging in the park or heading to classes, always with a smile on her face. That day, she went out for her usual run, but never returned. The search began almost immediately. Friends, family, and even strangers combed the city, hoping to find her safe and sound. Days passed with no sign of her, and our hope began to wane. Then, one morning, a jogger discovered her lifeless body near the old, rusted train tracks, hidden beneath a canopy of overgrown weeds and debris. The scene was horrific. She had been strangled, and her body showed signs of a brutal struggle. The police cordoned off the area, turning the once peaceful park into a somber crime scene. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, a stark contrast to the vibrant green of the surrounding trees. As the investigation unfolded, the details only added to the horror. She had been attacked and overpowered, her final moments filled with terror. The police canvassed the area, interviewed countless people, and followed up on numerous leads, but the killer remained elusive. Rumors and theories spread like wildfire. Some believed it was a random attack by a transient or someone familiar with the area. Others thought it might have been a planned assault by someone she knew. The uncertainty and fear gripped us all. In the weeks that followed, memorials and vigils were held in her honor. The community came together to mourn and to demand justice. Her family was devastated, their grief palpable as they pleaded for any information that might lead to the arrest of the person responsible. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, the case went cold. There were no witnesses, no concrete evidence, and no suspect to bring to justice. The killer had vanished, leaving behind only pain and unanswered questions. Years have passed since that tragic day, but the memory of her life and the brutal way it was taken from her still lingers. Every time I pass by those old train tracks, I am reminded of the senseless violence and the bright future that was stolen from her. The investigation remains open, and her family continues to hope for closure. They deserve answers, and she deserves justice. Until that day comes, we hold on to the memories of her kindness, her joy, and the light she brought into our lives, and we remain vigilant, hoping that one day, the truth will finally come to light. It was the summer of 1946, and the small town of Texarkana was buzzing with its usual southern charm and quiet routine. But the calm was shattered when a series of brutal attacks began, casting a dark shadow over the community. I remember that summer vividly. The town was gripped by fear as the so-called Phantom Killer struck with chilling precision. It all started one night when a young couple parked at a secluded spot near the edge of town. The Phantom Killer approached their car and, without warning, attacked them. The violence was sudden and merciless. The girl survived but was left severely injured, while the boy was tragically killed. The news of the attack spread quickly, and the town was thrown into a state of panic. People began locking their doors and avoiding the quiet, secluded areas that once felt safe. Then, just a few weeks later, the killer struck again, this time targeting another couple. They too were attacked while parked in a remote area. The details of the crime were horrific, with the victim suffering from the same brutal treatment as the first pair. As the summer wore on, the attacks continued. The Phantom Killer seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost, always eluding capture. Each attack followed a similar pattern: young couples, isolated locations, and an overwhelming sense of terror. The police were stumped, with no leads and no clear motive. The entire town was on edge. Rumors swirled about the killer's identity, and every shadow seemed to hold a hint of danger. Local authorities, alongside state and federal investigators, worked tirelessly, but the killer remained elusive. Witnesses reported seeing a masked figure, but their descriptions were vague and conflicting. Despite the intense investigation and widespread media coverage, the Phantom Killer was never caught. As quickly as the attacks had begun, they stopped, leaving the town with more questions than answers. The fear and anxiety slowly faded, but the memory of those brutal nights lingered. To this day, the identity of the Phantom Killer remains unknown. The case has become a chilling reminder of the fragility of safety and the shadows that can lurk even in the most seemingly tranquil places. The people of Texarkana still remember those dark days, a somber testament to the terror that once gripped their community. It was a warm summer evening in 2003 when I last saw them. The couple, full of life and excitement, were headed to Australia for what was supposed to be a memorable adventure. They were traveling by train, something they always enjoyed. But what began as a joyous trip turned into an unsettling mystery. I remember the night they disappeared. The train was running smoothly, making its way through the scenic Australian countryside. It was supposed to be a relaxing journey, but as the hours passed, something felt off. The couple seemed to vanish without a trace, leaving no indication of their departure. Initially, everyone thought it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe they had gotten off at an earlier stop or missed their connection. But as the train rolled on and they didn't reappear, worry began to set in. The crew and fellow passengers were baffled. The train had been checked thoroughly. Their belongings were still in their compartments, but there was no sign of them. The authorities were alerted, and a massive search was launched. Police combed through the train routes, interviewed witnesses, and checked nearby stations, but there were no clues. It was as if the couple had simply evaporated into thin air. The only thing that seemed certain was that they had not left the train voluntarily. Rumors began to swirl. Some thought they might have been involved in a criminal act or foul play, while others speculated about a more sinister reason for their disappearance. The more the investigation unfolded, the more mysterious their vanishing became. Months passed, and the case grew colder. The search gradually tapered off, and the couple's disappearance remained unresolved. The authorities were left with only fragmented theories and a troubling sense of unanswered questions. The train they had been on continued its routes, but the mystery of what happened to them cast a long shadow over the railway. To this day, the fate of that couple remains one of Australia's eerie unsolved mysteries. Whenever I hear about strange disappearances or unsettling stories on the news, I can't help but think of that summer evening and the couple who vanished without a trace. It's a stark reminder of how even the most ordinary journeys can end in the most inexplicable ways. It was a crisp autumn day in 1966 when the disaster struck. I was living in Wales, not far from Aberfan, a small mining village nestled in the hills. The coal slurry tip, a massive pile of waste from the local mine, had been a constant presence in our lives. We knew it was dangerous, but no one expected it would cause such devastation. That morning, everything seemed normal. The village was bustling with its usual activity as people went about their daily routines. The children were excited, looking forward to a day at school. But as the day wore on, a series of tremors began to shake the area, and soon the worst happened. Without warning, the slurry tip, saturated with water and instability, gave way. A massive wave of coal waste surged down the hill, engulfing everything in its path. I remember the horror of seeing the sludge pour into the village, swallowing houses, roads, and tragically, the school where so many children were. The aftermath was heart-wrenching. The rescue efforts were frantic, with teams of volunteers and emergency responders digging through the muck to save anyone they could. The train station, which had previously been a place of routine departures and arrivals, became the site of somber coordination and relief efforts. It was there that the true scale of the tragedy began to sink in. Over the next few days, the town was a hive of activity, but the mood was somber. The loss was immense. 144 people, including 116 children, had been killed. The wreckage left behind was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the hidden dangers that lurked in our everyday surroundings. The horror of Aberfan lingered in my mind long after the immediate aftermath. Even now, whenever I hear the distant rumble of a train or see coal heaps, I am reminded of that day. The tragedy was a dark chapter in our village's history, a reminder of the unexpected and devastating consequences of neglect and oversight. To this day, the memory of Aberfan serves as a somber lesson in the importance of safety and vigilance. The disaster remains a poignant example of how quickly life can be upended, and how the echoes of such tragedies continue to reverberate through the years. It was late at night in 2007 when I boarded the train in Japan, heading home after a long day. The atmosphere was quiet, with most passengers either asleep or lost in their thoughts. But something about that night felt different, as if an invisible presence was watching us. As the train chugged along its route, an unsettling feeling settled over me. I glanced around, noticing a few other passengers looking equally uneasy. The lights flickered intermittently, adding to the eerie ambience. I tried to shake off the feeling and focused on the rhythmic clatter of the wheels. But then, things took a turn for the bizarre. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadowy figure moving through the carriage. It was unlike any passenger I had ever seen. Its form seemed to waver and shift, as though it wasn't quite solid. I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind, but the figure persisted. A few moments later, other passengers began to murmur and point towards the same spot. Someone mentioned they had seen the figure as well. The tension in the carriage was palpable. The train conductor was alerted, and he came through the carriage, looking concerned but unable to spot anything unusual. When we reached the next station, a few passengers decided to leave the train early, shaken by the strange encounter. The station staff were notified, and they assured us they would investigate. As the train continued on its journey, the figure was nowhere to be seen, but the unease remained. The following day, news spread that similar eerie sightings had been reported on other trains in the area. Passengers spoke of ghostly figures and unexplained phenomena, contributing to the legend of the ghost train in Japan. The experiences seemed to converge around the same unsettling figure I had seen, and the stories only added to the mystery. To this day, the memory of that night lingers with me. The sensation of an otherworldly presence on that seemingly ordinary train ride remains vivid. Every time I board a train now, I can't help but feel a twinge of apprehension, wondering if the spectral figure will make another appearance. I've always believed that the quiet, lonely nights on the train held a certain charm. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels, the soft hum of the engine, and the occasional whistle breaking the silence, it all seemed so serene. But that night, everything changed. I was a passenger on the last train of the evening, heading to the end of the line. The carriage was nearly empty, save for a few tired commuters and myself. I settled into my seat, pulled out a book, and tried to lose myself in its pages. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the train sped through the dark countryside, I noticed a figure moving stealthily through the carriages. He seemed to be searching for something or someone. His eyes darted around, and his movements were tense. I tried to ignore him, convincing myself that it was none of my business. But then, a chilling scream pierced the night. The entire carriage froze. My heart pounded as I looked around, trying to locate the source of the scream. It came from a few seats behind me. Slowly, I turned and saw the figure from earlier standing over a lifeless body. Blood pooled around the victim, staining the floor a deep crimson. Panic ensued. Passengers scrambled to move away, some crying, others shouting for help. But we were trapped. The train continued its relentless journey, the end of the line still miles away. The figure made no move to escape. Instead, he stood there, staring at his handiwork with a cold, detached expression. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. Desperation clawed at me as I realized we had to wait until the next station to call for help. The minutes dragged on, each second feeling like an eternity. The murderer, sensing our helplessness, calmly walked to the end of the carriage and sat down, as if nothing had happened. When we finally reached the station, the police were waiting. Someone must have alerted them earlier. The murderer was apprehended without resistance. As they led him away, he turned and looked at me, his eyes devoid of emotion. That gaze haunts me to this day. The investigation revealed that the victim and the murderer had a history, a tale of betrayal and revenge that culminated in that horrifying night. But for those of us on that train, it was an experience that shattered the illusion of safety the night train once held.